Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city, and we start. The sun was setting behind the Connecticut hills, turning the sky crimson and gold, as if someone had spilled paint on a perfect canvas. The Lawson house sat on the edge of a cliff, its glass walls reflecting the sunset like a mirror that had seen too much. It was Brian's masterpiece, 3 stories, clean lines, concrete and glass, blending with nature but rising above it. Every corner, every beam, every seam was his. 2 years of work, sleepless nights, disputes with contractors, self-doubt. And now he is ready. Today is housewarming. Brian Lawson stood on the terrace, leaning on the railing, his broad shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of fatigue. He was 38, but recent months had added a couple of gray streaks to his dark hair and wrinkles around his eyes. His hands, still stained with construction dust, clutched a glass of whiskey, although he barely took a sip. He looked at the guests gathered in the spacious living room below. Colleagues from his architectural firm, a few friends, neighbors whom Sophia had insisted on inviting. Their laughter and the clink of glasses echoed off the glass walls, but Brian felt detached, as if he was looking at someone else's life. Brian, Sophia's voice, melodious but with a subtle harshness, pulled him out of his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a tray of canapes, her dark green dress hugging her figure, emphasizing her graceful curves. Her brown hair was pulled back into a loose bun, but a few strands had escaped, falling down her neck. She looked perfect as always, too perfect. "Are you going to come down, or are you going to hang here like a statue all evening?" He smiled, but the smile came out forced. "I'm coming, Sophie. Just give me a minute. I want to remember this moment." She rolled her eyes, but something else flashed in her gaze: irritation. Contempt? Brian wasn't sure. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the oak floor as she walked down the stairs. He looked after her, trying to remember when her voice stopped sounding warm. Maybe a year ago, 2? Or is it he himself who has changed? Brian took a sip of whiskey, feeling the liquid burn his throat. The house was his triumph, but now, standing here, he felt empty. He built this place for the two of them, for Sophia, for their future, for the family they didn't yet have. But every time he looked at her, it seemed to him that she was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The living room was buzzing. Someone turned on jazz, soft, unobtrusive, but Brian hated jazz. It was Sophia's choice, like almost everything in this house, except the architecture itself. She chose furniture, paintings, even the damn pillows on the sofa. He wanted minimalism, she wanted comfort. He gave in, always gave in, because her smile when she was satisfied was worth it. Or it was worth it before. Brian, man, this is fucking incredible. Mark, his partner in the company, slapped him on the shoulder, almost spilling his beer. Mark was a couple of years younger, with a boyish smile and energy that irritated Brian, but he appreciated him as a professional. "I'm serious, this house is your ticket to the big world. If you submit a project for an award, you will be noticed. This is not just a house, it is a work of art." "Thank you, Mark." Brian nodded, but his gaze slid past to Sophia. She stood by the fireplace, surrounded by 3 women from their new neighborhood, laughing. Her laugh was loud, but Brian knew her enough to know that it wasn't real laughter. It was a mask she wore for others. He saw the real her in those rare moments when they were together, when she was not pretending. Or did he just think he saw her? "Are you okay, brother?" Mark frowned, following his gaze. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm just tired," Brian waved it off. 2 years without days off, you know. "Yes, but it was worth it." Mark pointed to the panoramic windows, which overlooked the forest and distant city lights. "This is your masterpiece. And Sophia damn sure looks like a queen in this palace. You and her are the perfect couple." Brian said nothing. The perfect couple. He once thought so. They met 10 years ago, when he was an unknown architect and she was an art student full of ambition. They dreamed together. He would build houses, she would open a gallery. But the gallery remained a dream, and Sophia now worked at a local school, teaching art to children who would not listen to her. Did she blame him, or yourself? He didn't know. They stopped talking about it. The evening dragged on slowly. Guests praised the house, asked questions about the materials, and how he came up with such a layout. Brian responded on autopilot, but his mind was elsewhere. He noticed Sophia move into a corner with a man he didn't know. Tall, in an expensive suit, with dark hair and a confident smile. He leaned towards her, whispering something, and she laughed again, but this time the laughter seemed different to Brian. More alive. "Who is this?" Brian asked without looking away. His voice was calm, but his fingers tightened his grip on the glass. Mark followed his gaze and shrugged. "I have no idea. Probably one of the neighbors. Sophia called everyone, right?" He chuckled, but noticing how Brian's face tensed, he added, "Relax, old man. She's just playing hostess. You know how much she loves to be the center of attention." Brian nodded, but something tightened inside him. He knew Sophia. "I knew her habit of twirling a strand of hair around her finger when she was nervous. I knew how she looked away when she was lying. But now, looking at her with this stranger, he saw something new. Her hand lingered slightly on his sleeve as she touched him, adjusting something on his jacket. It was barely noticeable, but Brian noticed. He always noticed. He took another sip of whiskey, trying to push away the growing feeling of anxiety. "It doesn't mean anything," he told himself. "Just a housewarming party, just a conversation." But his eyes did not leave them. The stranger said something, and Sophia threw back her head, laughing as she had not laughed with him for a long time. Brian felt his heart clench, as if someone was slowly squeezing it in a fist. "I'll go say hello," he said to Mark, putting his glass on the railing. His voice was even, but inside he was seething. "Come on," Mark grinned. "Show me who's boss here." Brian walked down the stairs, maneuvering between the guests. Smiles, handshakes, snatches of conversation, everything passed by as if in a fog. He moved towards Sophia, but his eyes were focused on the man next to her. He noticed his approach and straightened up, his smile becoming a little less confident. "Brian." Sophia turned to him, her eyes sparkled, but he could not understand whether it was joy or anxiety. "There you are. I already thought you decided to run away from everyone." "I wouldn't run away from you," he said, trying to make his voice sound light. He looked at the man. "And this?" "Oh, this is Nathan." Sophia gestured at him, her smile perfect. "Nathan Keller, our neighbor. He just moved into a house across the street. I told you, remember." Brian didn't remember. He didn't remember Sophia mentioning any Nathan at all. But he nodded, holding out his hand. "Brian Lawson. Nice to meet you." "Nathan Keller." The man shook his hand. His grip was firm, almost defiant. "Your house is something incredible. Sophia told you that you designed it yourself." "Yes," Brian nodded, his gaze sliding to Sophia. She looked at Nathan, and there was something in her eyes that Brian couldn't decipher. It was a long project. "I can imagine," Nathan smiled, but his eyes remained cold, appraising. "Sophia said you literally lived on a construction site. This is impressive. Not every man is able to build this for his wife." Brian felt his jaw tense. Something about Nathan's tone too smooth, too confident made him wary. He looked at Sophia, expecting her to say something, but she just smiled, straightening a lock of hair. "Brian is a perfectionist," she said. Her voice was light, but there was some tension in it. "If it weren't for him, we would still be living in that terrible apartment in the center." "Well, now you have a palace." Nathan raised his glass, as if in a toast. "Here's to you, Brian, and for Sophia, of course." Brian forced himself to smile, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He watched as Sophia leaned a little closer to Nathan, as her hand touched his sleeve again, as she laughed at some of his jokes. It was a small thing, nonsense, but every detail cut him like a shard of glass. The evening continued, but Brian could no longer concentrate on the guests. He answered questions, smiled when necessary, but his gaze kept returning to Sophia and Nathan. They weren't always together. She moved from one group of guests to another, playing the role of the ideal hostess, but Nathan was always nearby. And every time their eyes met, Brian felt something inside him crack. By midnight, the guests began to leave. Cars drove away from the house, headlights flashed in the darkness, and soon there were only empty glasses and silence in the living room. Sophia stood at the window, looking at the forest, her silhouette reflected in the glass. Brian approached her, his steps almost silent on the oak floor. Tuesday morning smelled of coffee and freshly cut grass. Brian Lawson sat at the kitchen island, his fingers sliding across the tablet screen, checking smart home notifications. The system he designed from scratch was as proud as the building itself. Cameras on every corner, motion sensors, thermostats, lighting, everything is under control, everything is perfectly synchronized. He could turn on the bedroom light without leaving his chair, or check who was coming to the front door at 3 in the morning. This was his world, where every detail was subject to logic and order, unlike everything else. "Good morning," Sophia's voice was soft but lifeless, as if she was reading a line from a script. She entered the kitchen, her silk robe rustling lightly on the floor. Her hair was damp from her shower, and she smelled of lavender, the same gel he'd given her for their anniversary. Brian looked up, but she had already turned away, pouring herself some coffee. "Good," he replied, watching her move. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if she was trying to avoid unnecessary gestures. He wanted to ask how she slept, but the words got stuck in his throat. After the housewarming, after the night he saw her with Nathan Keller, their conversations became shorter, drier, like autumn leaves underfoot. Sophia sat down opposite her, her eyes sliding over the tablet. "Playing with your toy again." She nodded at the screen where the green system indicators were flashing. "Do you ever switch off?" "This is not a toy," Brian frowned slightly, but tried to keep his tone light. "This is safety, control. You know how much work I put into this." "Oh, I know." She took a sip of coffee, her lips slightly curved into a smile, but her eyes remained cold. "You're building everything, Brian. Home, systems, even relationships. Everything according to your drawings." He froze, her words hanging in the air like smoke. It was not just a phrase, but an injection, sharp and precise. He wanted to object, to ask what she meant, but instead he just nodded, turning back to the screen. "Someone has to," he muttered, more for himself than for her. Sophia didn't answer. She stood up, put the cup in the sink, and left the kitchen, leaving behind only the light scent of lavender and silence that became louder every day. The days passed slowly, falling into a routine that should have been comfortable, but instead felt suffocating. Brian went to the office by 8 in the morning, where sketches of new projects, calls from clients, and endless meetings awaited him. He was good at his job, methodical, attentive to detail, but his thoughts increasingly turned to home. Not to drawings or walls, but to Sophia. The way she looked away when he tried to speak. To the way her phone lit up with notifications that she immediately hid. At home, everything was under control, or so it seemed. The smart home worked flawlessly. The cameras recorded every movement. The neighbor's dog running across the lawn, the postman leaving a package at the door, even Sophia when she went out onto the terrace with a glass of wine in the evenings. Brian didn't specifically keep an eye on her, but the system sent notifications to his phone, and he couldn't help but watch. Sometimes he would open the app just like that, switching between cameras as if he was looking for something he couldn't name. One evening, returning home earlier than usual, he found Sophia in the living room. She sat cross-legged on the couch, her phone face down next to her. There was a series on the TV screen, but the sound was turned off. She didn't notice him right away, and Brian stood in the doorway, watching. Her face was relaxed, almost dreamy, but in the corners of her lips lurked the shadow of a smile that he had not seen for a long time. "You're early," she said, finally noticing him. Her voice was flat, but she quickly grabbed the phone, putting it in her robe pocket. "Yes, the client canceled the meeting," Brian shrugged, taking off his jacket. He wanted to ask what she was watching and why there was no sound, but instead he said, "Do you want to order something for dinner?" "Not particularly hungry." She stood up, stretching. "I'll probably go to bed early. Tired." "Already?" He looked at his watch. It was barely 7. Maybe we can sit together. We haven't chatted for a long time. She looked at him, and for a second he thought he saw something flash in her eyes, regret, irritation. But she just smiled, the same forced smile as in the morning. Maybe tomorrow, Brian. I'm really exhausted. She went upstairs, leaving him in the empty living room. The TV was still showing the series, but now it was just a collection of colored spots. Brian turned it off and sat down on the sofa, feeling the silence pressing on his temples. He took out his phone and opened the smart home app. The camera on the terrace showed emptiness, only the dark forest and the stars above it. Camera in the bedroom. He hesitated, but still switched. Sophia stood at the window, her silhouette clearly outlined against the background of the glass. She was holding the phone, her fingers typing quickly, her face illuminated by the faint light of the screen. She smiled. Not him. Brian turned off the app, his heart beating faster than he'd like to admit. It doesn't mean anything, he told himself. Just a message. Just tired. But deep down he knew it was a lie. Something was wrong, and that something was growing like a crack in the foundation of his ideal home. The following days only intensified this feeling. Sophia went to work at school and returned late, citing meetings or extra classes with students. Brian didn't ask, but he noticed little things. A new perfume that wasn't there before, a neatly put-away phone when he entered the room, her distant look when he tried to hug her. He didn't want to be paranoid, but thoughts entered his head like uninvited guests. One night, unable to sleep, he opened the app again. The cameras showed the house in sleep mode. Dark rooms, flashing sensors, everything was calm. But something made him scroll through the day's records. He didn't know what he was looking for, but settled on footage from the terrace where Sophia stood during the day, talking on the phone. She laughed, her hand fiddling with a lock of hair, a gesture he had once found charming. The conversation lasted almost 10 minutes, and Brian watched her walk back and forth, her face alternately lighting up with a smile and then becoming serious. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but her eyes. They were alive, like they weren't with him. The night was muggy, despite the autumn chill that pervaded Connecticut. Brian Lawson sat in his office on the second floor, surrounded by the bluish light of the monitor. His fingers flew over the keyboard, and his eyes, red with fatigue, peered at the lines of code. The smart home, his own creation, had to be infallible. Cameras, sensors, servers, he designed all this with manic precision to protect his family, his world. But now this world was bursting at the seams. It all started 3 nights ago. Brian received a notification from the system. The motion sensor on the back deck went off at 2:47 am. He opened the app, expecting to see a raccoon or, at worst, a lost neighbor. But the video didn't load. Access error, the message read. He chalked it up to a glitch, rebooted the server, and checked the connection. The next day, another notification, this time at 3:12 am, and again no video. By the morning of the third day, when the sensor went off at 2:59 and the recording disappeared again, Brian realized that this was not a glitch. This was something different. "You have to tell me everything," he muttered, turning to the screen as if the system could answer. His voice was hoarse, almost alien. Sophia was sleeping upstairs or pretending to be. In recent weeks, she had been going to bed early, citing fatigue, but Brian couldn't shake the feeling that she was avoiding him. Her aloofness, her smiles, which seemed more and more artificial, her phone, which she now never left unattended, all this formed a mosaic that he was afraid to examine in its entirety. He opened a terminal and launched access to the smart home server. As the architect of the system, he knew every corner of it, every line of code. But now he felt like a burglar, intruding on his own creation. Fingers froze over the keyboard. It was crazy. He shouldn't dig into logs and track down his own wife. But the image of Sophia laughing with Nathan Keller at a housewarming party, her hand on his sleeve, her lively, almost unfamiliar gaze, all this burned him from the inside. He should have known. The first thing he did was check the standard system logs. They were clean too clean. Sensor alerts were logged, but the video files that should have been stored on the local server were missing. Someone or something was deleting them. Brian frowned, his heart beating faster. He switched to shadow logs, hidden files that the system created for debugging. They weren't intended for general access, but Brian built them in case something went wrong. Like now. The logs were huge, millions of lines, but he wrote a script to filter the logs for the last 3 nights. The screen is filled with data, timestamps, error codes, fragments of system commands. And there, in the chaos of numbers, he found an anomaly. At 2:47, 3:12, and 2:59 am, the system recorded not only the sensor's activation, but also a command to delete the video. The command did not come from him, and not from Sophia. Her account did not have such rights. Someone else had access. It's impossible, Brian whispered, his fingers still. He set up the security system himself. Two-factor authentication, encrypted keys, everything to the highest standard. It would be extremely difficult to hack, unless someone knew the system as well as he did, or if someone was inside. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sliding to the window. There was darkness behind the glass, only the faint lights of the neighboring houses flickered in the distance. Nathan Keller's house was there, across the street, its windows dark like eyes watching you. Brian remembered Nathan talking about the house at the housewarming party, his too precise questions about the system, about the cameras. At the time, it seemed just curiosity. Now something else. He returned to the logs, digging deeper into the data. He needed to restore at least some of the deleted videos. He knew that the system creates temporary caches before permanent deletion, tiny fragments that can be pulled out if you know where to look. It was like picking up broken glass, but Brian was ready. He started the recovery, and after a few minutes, the first frames appeared on the screen. The video was grainy, fragmented, only a few seconds long. Terrace illuminated by the faint light of the moon. 2 silhouettes, unclear, but recognizable. One is female, with long hair. The second is male, tall, in dark clothes. They stood close, too close. Brian held his breath, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. The silhouettes moved, their shadows merged, and then a cliff. The video has ended. He started recovery again, his hands shaking. The next fragment was shorter, but clearer. Same corner, same terrace. Now he saw her, Sophia. Her face, illuminated by a weak light, was turned towards the man. She smiled, her hand lay on his chest. The man leaned down and their lips met. The kiss was short, but for Brian it lasted forever. The screen flickered and the video cut out. Brian stumbled back, his breathing becoming ragged. He felt the blood pounding in his temples, how the world around him was shrinking to a point. It was her. Hi, Sophia. With someone else. On his terrace, in his house, under his cameras. He wanted to scream, smash the monitor, burst into the bedroom and demand answers. But instead, he sat there, paralyzed, staring at the black screen. Who was it? Nathan? Someone else? And how did they delete the video? Questions swirled in my head, but there were no answers. He returned to the logs, his fingers moving faster, almost feverishly. He found traces of external access, an IP address that did not belong to their network. Someone connected to the system from outside using an account with administrator rights. It wasn't Sophia. This was someone who knew what he was doing. Brian launched a tracker to track the IP. The result came in a minute. The address was masked via VPN, but came from their area. Close, too close. He looked at the window, at the dark silhouette of Nathan's house. Coincidence, or something more? He dug further, recovering another fragment. This time, the video only showed a shadow gliding past the camera at the front door. A man, tall, wearing a hood. You can't see her face, but her gait. Something about it was familiar. Brian froze, his mind trying to put the pieces together. He had only seen Nathan once, but his confident posture, his manner of movement, all this emerged in his memory like a ghost. The clock showed 4:03 am. The house was quiet, but the silence seemed alive, full of whispers. Brian turned off the monitor, but the image of Sophia kissing someone on the terrace did not go away. He felt his world crumbling, his control, his system, his marriage, his life slipping away. He built this house to protect her, to hold her. But now he understood. He had no control over anything. Brian Lawson sat in his SUV, parked in the shade of an old oak tree at the end of their street. His fingers squeezed the steering wheel, although the car had been turned off for half an hour. The clock on the dashboard showed 11:42 at night. He waited. It all started with little things that he tried to ignore at first. After that night in the office, when he reconstructed snippets of video silhouettes on the terrace, Sophia kissing someone whose face he couldn't see, Brian became more attentive. He didn't talk to her about it, didn't ask her, didn't blame her. He was afraid of her answer, but even more afraid that she would lie. Instead, he began to observe. He noticed the first coincidence by accident. On Wednesday evening, when Sophia said she would be late for a school meeting, Brian saw her car pull into the driveway at 10:17 p.m. He stood by the living room window, absent-mindedly checking his smart home notifications. 3 minutes later, almost simultaneously, the headlights of another car illuminated the street. Nathan Keller's dark sedan parked slowly at his house across the street. Brian froze, his gaze darting from Sophia, who was entering the house, to the silhouette of Nathan getting out of the car. It was too close in time, too precise. The next evening, the story repeated itself. Sophia left to meet a friend. Her words were spoken casually, without looking into the eyes. She returned at 11:04. Nathan parked at 11:08. Brian looked out the bedroom window, his fingers gripping the sill. Coincidence? Maybe. But his mind, accustomed to finding patterns in drawings and systems, refused to believe in accidents. Now he was sitting in the car, away from home, so as not to attract attention. His smart home was still sending notifications. The sensor on the front door went off at 11:39 am, when Sophia left, saying she was going grocery shopping. At a time like this, Brian didn't argue, he just nodded, but as soon as her car disappeared around the bend, he grabbed the keys and drove after her. Not for her, he didn't want to be that husband who stalks his wife. He was watching Nathan. The parking lot at Keller's house was empty and his sedan was missing. Brian checked his phone, and his smart home app showed that the street camera had recorded motion at 11:41 am as Nathan's car pulled out of the driveway, 2 minutes after Sophia, again. His heart began to pound, his fingers gripping the phone until the screen flickered. He turned on the laptop lying on the passenger seat and connected it to the smart home system. After the night he found the deleted videos, Brian tightened his control. He added hidden logs that recorded every action of the system and configured video backup to an external server, inaccessible to outside interference. If anyone tries to erase the records again, they will know. But now he wanted to see everything in real time. The camera on the corner of their house showed an empty street. Brian shifted into second at the entrance to an area where the road split. Nothing. He waited, his breathing heavy, almost painful. Then, at 11:49, headlights flashed on the screen. Sophia's car, he recognized it by the characteristic curve of the bumper, slowly drove past the camera, heading towards the exit from the area. Brian held his breath, his eyes darting between the screen and the road. 2 minutes later, like clockwork, another car appeared. Nathan's dark sedan. He moved in the same direction, keeping his distance. Brian felt the blood rush to his temples. This is not a coincidence. This couldn't be a coincidence. He started the engine, but did not turn on the headlights. His SUV pulled out slowly from the shadows, following the sedan at a safe distance. The streets were empty, only rare streetlights cast spots of light on the asphalt. The silence was almost tangible, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Brian stayed behind, his thoughts confused. What is he doing? Is he watching his wife? For a neighbor? For both? He didn't know what to expect, but the image of Sophia kissing someone on the terrace haunted him. Nathan's sedan turned onto the main road leading to a small shopping center on the outskirts. Brian slowed down, letting the car move forward. He knew that Sophia would not go grocery shopping at such a time. The shops closed at 10. But he saw her car parked at a dark corner of the parking lot, away from the streetlights. Nathan's sedan stopped nearby, but not close. Far enough away to not arouse suspicion, but close enough for Brian to notice. He parked to the side, turned off the engine, and opened his laptop. His fingers trembled as he connected to the shopping center's cameras. He had hacked them yesterday, when he began to suspect that Sophia was lying about her trips. It was easier than he expected. Weak passwords, outdated software. Now he could see the parking lot in real time, although the image was grainy. Sophia got out of the car, her silhouette clear even in the dim light. She looked around, straightened her hair, and headed towards the dark alley behind the building. Brian switched to the other camera, his heart beating so loudly it drowned out the silence. Nathan got out of the sedan. His movements were fast and confident. He followed the same path, but not directly behind her, but going around the building on the other side. Brian held his breath. He wanted to jump out of the car, rush in, and demand answers. But instead, he watched their shadows flicker across the alley. The camera couldn't show everything. The angle was bad, the light was dim. But he had seen enough. They met, their silhouettes merged for a second before disappearing around the corner. Brian zoomed in, his fingers shaking. It was not a kiss, not now, but the closeness, the intimacy of their movements cut him like a knife. He returned to the smart home system, checking the logs. The camera outside their house recorded Sophia leaving, but did not show anything about Nathan. His car was out of coverage. Brian ran a script to see if anyone had tampered with the system again. The logs confirmed that someone tried to access the cameras at 11:40, but the backup failed. The video has been saved. He downloaded it without looking, knowing he wasn't ready to see more. The silence of the parking lot was oppressive. Brian looked at the empty alley where Sophia and Nathan had disappeared. He could go there, confront them, but what would he say? That he saw them on cameras? That he hacked into the system to spy on his own wife? He felt his world falling apart, but he couldn't stop. Observation became his only way to maintain control, even if that control was an illusion. He waited. At 12:14 p.m., Sophia returned to her car alone. Her face was expressionless, but she moved quickly, as if she was afraid that someone would notice. Nathan appeared a minute later, his sedan pulled out of the parking lot as if nothing had happened. Brian watched their headlights disappear into the night, his hands gripping the steering wheel until it hurt. He returned home at 12:37 p.m. Sophia was already there, in the bedroom, pretending to be asleep. Brian didn't bother waking her. He went down to his office, opened his laptop, and started watching the saved videos. Every movement, every glance, every second he could catch. He knew it would destroy him, but he couldn't stop. Nathan was more than just a neighbor, and Sophia was not just his wife. They were a secret he had to reveal, even if it destroyed everything he had built. The night in the Lawson house was not just dark, it was alive, full of shadows that whispered behind the glass walls. Brian Lawson sat in his office, surrounded by the cold light of the monitor. His fingers lay on the keyboard, but did not move. He had not slept for 2 days, and his eyes, sore and dry, looked at the screen where the smart home application showed an empty living room. The silence was deafening, but it could not drown out his thoughts. The last days turned into a nightmare that he created for himself. The coincidences, Sophia and Nathan, their synchronized appearances and disappearances, their shadows in the parking lot became evidence. Brian knew the truth was coming, but he wasn't prepared for how painful it would be. He strengthened the smart home system by adding hidden cameras that Sophia did not know about. One of them was in the bedroom, not for spying on her, but for safety, as he convinced himself. But now this camera has become his judge. In the evening, Sophia said that she was going to see her friend. He said that he would stay at work until late today. Her voice was light, almost carefree, but Brian noticed how she avoided his gaze, how her fingers fiddled with the strap of her bag. He nodded without asking questions and left for work. As soon as he entered the office, he opened the application. His heart was pounding, but he couldn't stop. He should have known. The cameras showed an empty house. The living room, the kitchen, the terrace, everything was motionless, like in a painting. Brian switched to the camera at the front door, checking the logs. At 8:47 p.m., the sensor detected movement, but the video did not load. Deletion again. He started recovery, his fingers trembling. It took a few minutes, but he pulled out the fragment. The recording was of Sophia entering the house. Not alone. Nathan Keller walked behind her, his arm casually resting on her waist. They laughed, their voices were muffled, but Brian recognized this laugh, the one that Sophia had not given him for a long time. He switched to the camera in the bedroom, his breathing becoming ragged. The screen blinked and the image loaded. The bedroom is their bedroom, with the wide bed that he chose with her in a furniture store 5 years ago, with the sheets that she selected so carefully. Now Sophia was on this bed. And Nathan. Brian froze, his world stopped. He saw everything, her arms around Nathan, his lips on her neck, their bodies moving in a rhythm that was both familiar and foreign. It wasn't just sex, it was betrayal carved into the heart of the house he'd built for her. Every glass, every beam, every nail in this house was his, and now this house has witnessed his betrayal. He could not look away, although every frame cut him like a splinter. Sophia, his Sophia, laughed, her hair scattered across the pillow. Her eyes sparkled in a way they hadn't sparkled with him for years. Nathan whispered something to her, and she answered, her voice soft, intimate. Brian didn't turn up the sound he didn't want to hear. The picture was enough for him. She was quite loud. His fingers curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to burst in, smash everything, scream, demand an explanation. But he was 10 miles from home, sitting in his office, staring at the screen that showed the truth he couldn't escape. And even if he were there, what would he do? Would you hit Nathan? Would you yell at Sophia? Or would I just stand there, as I do now, paralyzed by my own helplessness? The recording continued, but Brian didn't watch anymore. His gaze became blank, as if someone had turned off the light inside him. He's seen enough. Bedroom. His bed. His wife. Everything he had built, everything he believed in, was crushed in those few minutes. The house that should have been their refuge became the stage for his humiliation. He reached out his hand to the mouse. His movements were slow, almost mechanical. One click and the screen goes dark. The silence returned, but now it was different, heavy, like a tombstone. Brian leaned back in his chair, his eyes staring at the ceiling. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't move. He just sat there, feeling something inside him break, like a crack in the foundation that he couldn't fix. His thoughts were chaotic, but one thing kept repeating itself over and over again. Why? Why did she do this? Why in their house, in their bedroom? Was this revenge? Or did she just stop loving him? He remembered her words. You build everything, even relationships. He didn't understand then, but now her voice sounded in his head like an accusation. He built this house to keep her, to prove his worth. But she chose someone else. Right here, under his cameras, in his world. He didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe minutes. Maybe a watch. He stood up. His legs were weak. He turned off the computer, the light in the office, and went home. It was dark there. Only the moonlight made its way through the panoramic windows, reflecting on the glass. He stopped by the fireplace where he and Sophia had once planned their future. Now this place seemed alien, like a set from someone else's life. Brian didn't go into the bedroom. He lay down on the sofa without undressing and closed his eyes. But sleep did not come. Instead, frames popped up before his eyes again and again. Her hands, his lips, their bodies. He saw everything, but remained a silent witness. Not because he didn't want to interfere, but because he didn't know how. His world collapsed, and all he could do was turn off the screen. In the morning, Sophia will find him here and ask why he was not sleeping in bed. He will lie, as he has lied for the past weeks. But a plan was already forming in his head. Not revenge, not confrontation, something else. He will observe, collect evidence, analyze this betrayal, like a project that needs to be completed. Because despite the pain, despite the betrayal, he was still an architect. And he won't let his home, his life collapse without a fight. The silence in the Lawson house was not just the absence of sound, it was explosive, like the calm before a storm, when the air trembles with tension. Brian Lawson stood in his office, looking at the sketches laid out on his desk. His fingers, still smelling of ink and coffee, trembled as he traced the lines of the drawings. This was Project No, the second house, which he began to design 2 years ago, when Sophia was still talking about children, about the future, about family. The plot adjacent to their house was purchased for this purpose. Spacious, overlooking the forest, ideal for a new beginning. But now this project has become something else, something dark. After that night when he saw Sophia with Nathan on their bed, in their bedroom, in the house he built for her, Brian changed. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, didn't demand explanations. He simply turned off the screen and retreated into himself, into that explosive silence where his pain turned into a plan. He couldn't destroy their marriage, not yet, but he could build something new. Something that would reflect his wounds, his control, his truth. And this something became the House of Mirrors. The idea came to him the day after that recording, while he was sitting in his office, staring at a blank computer screen. The House of Mirrors is an exact copy of their current house, but upside down, like a reflection in a crooked mirror. Every wall, every window, every room will be identical, but with the opposite orientation. This would be his answer, his challenge, his way of taking back what Sophia and Nathan had stolen from him. The house he built for her became a place of betrayal. The new home will be his revenge, or perhaps his salvation. Brian started with the drawings. He worked at night when Sophia slept or pretended to sleep. His pencil moved across the paper with feverish precision, tracing their home in a mirror image. The living room where she laughed with Nathan at the housewarming party will now be on the right instead of the left. The bedroom where he saw them together will become its opposite, but with the same bed, the same sheets. He didn't know why he needed it, but he felt he had to. It was more than architecture. It was an obsession. To keep everything secret, he acted carefully. Sophia wasn't supposed to know. Nobody was supposed to know. He rented the equipment through a shell company he created in a day, using an old bank account that Sophia had forgotten about. Excavators, concrete mixers, cranes, everything was delivered at night to a neighboring plot, hidden from their house by dense trees. Brian hired a crew from out of state, workers who didn't ask questions and took cash. He met them at a motel on the outskirts, posing as an investor wanting to build a pilot project. They nodded, took the money, and did as told. Construction began a week later. Brian watched him from afar, standing on a hill behind the property where no one could see him. Excavators dug into the ground, tearing out roots and rocks as if they were opening the skin of the earth. The foundation was poured at night, under the light of spotlights, which went out as soon as the first rays of the sun touched the horizon. The house grew slowly, but inexorably, like a disease ripening under the skin of the site. The concrete walls rose, repeating the outline of his house, but upside down. Glass panels, ordered from the same supplier, reflected the forest, but now from a different side. It was both familiar and foreign, like looking at a reflection of yourself that wasn't quite you. Sophia didn't notice anything. Or she pretended to. She went to work and returned late, citing classes, meetings, and friends. Brian no longer asked where she was going. He knew. His cameras recorded her departures, her returns, her meetings with Nathan. He didn't watch the tapes after that night in the bedroom he couldn't bring himself to. But he knew they were going on. Nathan would come over to their house while Brian was in the office. Sometimes he would see his car in the driveway when he came back early. Sophia explained this as neighborly help. Nathan allegedly repaired the faucet or brought a package. Brian nodded, his face unreadable, but inside his silence exploded. He spent more and more time at the site. During the day he was in the office, drawing up projects for clients, but his thoughts were there, with the House of Mirrors. At night he checked the progress, walking around the construction site in the dark, his flashlight snatching unfinished walls from the darkness. The workers called him boss and avoided making eye contact. They felt that this project was more than just a house. There was something wrong about it, like a painting where everything is in place, but the proportions are distorted. One night, standing at the foundation, Brian suddenly realized why he was doing this. The House of Mirrors was not just a copy. It was an attempt to rewrite reality, to create a place where he could control everything, even her betrayal. Nathan will not be in this house. There will be no betrayal. But the more he looked at the unfinished walls, the clearer he realized he could not build love. He can only build walls. Sophia began to notice his absence. "You're disappearing somewhere," she said one day at dinner. Her voice was light, but with a hint of suspicion. "Everything is fine." "Just work," Brian answered, without looking up from his plate. "New project." "Which?" She bowed her head, her fingers hovering over her glass. "Nothing special," he shrugged, but his heart was pounding. "Just an experiment." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on him a little longer than necessary. Brian knew she didn't believe it, but he didn't care. Let him suspect. Let him feel that something is wrong. He wanted her to feel like he did trapped in her own lies. The house grew. By the end of the second week, the frame was ready and workers began installing the windows. Brian stood in the lot, watching the glass panels slide into place, reflecting the stars. It was beautiful, but the beauty was poisonous, like a flower that grows on a grave. He imagined how Sophia would see this house, how her face would change when she realized that he knew everything. But he was not ready for this conversation. Not yet. The explosive silence inside him grew along with the house. She filled him, drowning out everything: love, pain, hope. He didn't know what would happen when the house was finished. Maybe he'll burn it. Maybe he will leave it empty as a monument to his destruction. But for now he built, because it was the only thing he knew how to do. Build even when everything was falling apart. At night, returning home, he lay down on the sofa, avoiding the bedroom. Sophia was sleeping upstairs, her breathing was even, but he knew she was awake. She waited as he waited. Two people, locked in a house that became their prison, were building their own secrets. And somewhere, behind the trees, another house grew a mirror of their lies, their pain, their end. The October wind howled outside the windows, but it was even colder inside. Brian sat at the kitchen island, staring at his empty coffee cup, his fingers mindlessly tracing patterns on the marble countertop. He had not slept properly for weeks, and his face, haggard and pale, was reflected in the dark screen of the tablet like a ghost. Sophia was at home, but her presence was felt only as a shadow sliding through the rooms. She didn't notice anything. I didn't see how behind the trees, on the neighboring plot, a mirror house was growing an inverted reflection of their life, which Brian built with an obsession bordering on madness. I didn't notice how he disappeared at night, returning with the smell of earth and concrete on his clothes. I didn't feel how his gaze, once full of warmth, became empty, like the windows of an unfinished house. Sophia lived in her own world, and this world was moving further and further away from Brian. "I'm visiting Lisa today," she said in the morning, standing at the door with a bag over her shoulder. Her voice was light, almost carefree, as if she were reporting the weather. Lisa was her friend, or so she said. Brian didn't ask. He knew it was a lie, but the truth was too heavy to touch. "Okay," he answered without looking up. His voice was even, but inside he was seething. He saw her with Nathan on tapes, in their bedroom, on their bed. He knew where she was going when she talked about girlfriends. But he was silent because words would not change anything. They would only destroy the fragile illusion that he was still trying to preserve. Sophia paused at the door, her fingers frozen on the handle. "Are you okay?" she asked, and a hint of concern flashed in her voice, or it seemed to him. Yes, he forced himself to smile, but the smile came out deathly. "I'm just tired." She nodded, her gaze flickering over him, but not lingering. A second later, she was gone, her heels clicking on the porch, and the car started. Brian sat motionless, listening to the sound of the engine fade in the distance. The house was empty, and the cold became even more noticeable. She began to stay with her friends more and more often. First once a week, then twice, now almost every night. She returned in the morning with a slight smell of someone else's perfume and fatigue in her eyes, which he did not want to decipher. Brian didn't ask where she was. He didn't ask anything. Their conversations were kept to a minimum, short phrases about bills, groceries, the weather. He answered in monosyllables. His voice was like an echo in an empty house. Sophia didn't seem to notice, or I didn't want to notice. The house he built for her became someone else's. The living room where they had once laughed and planned for the future was now just a room with furniture. The kitchen where they prepared dinners became a place where he drank coffee alone. The bedroom. He hadn't gone there since the night he saw the tape. He slept on the sofa, covering himself with a blanket that smelled of dust. Sophia didn't ask why he was avoiding the bed. Maybe she was glad. His life now revolved around the House of Mirrors. Every night when Sophia left, Brian went to the station. He walked around the construction site, checking the progress. The walls were already standing, glass panels sparkled under the moon, repeating the outlines of their house, but in reverse order. The workers worked in silence, their faces hidden in shadows. Brian paid them twice as much to keep their mouths shut, and they complied. The house grew like a tumor, invisible to Sophia, but devouring it from the inside. He led 2 projects, one in the office, for clients, the other here, in secret. By day, he was an architect, methodical and focused, drawing designs for new buildings. At night, he became a ghost, wandering among the unfinished walls, where every nail was his pain, every seam his revenge. He didn't know what would happen when the house was ready. Maybe he could show it to Sophia, make her see that he knew everything. Maybe he'll leave it empty as a symbol of their broken marriage. But for now he built, because it was the only thing that kept him from falling into the abyss. Sophia returned in the morning. Her steps were light, as if she was trying not to wake him. Sometimes she would prepare breakfast, leaving a plate of toast on the table, but Brian would not touch the food. He looked at her, sitting opposite, and saw a strange woman. Her smile, her gestures, her voice, everything was familiar, but belonged to someone else. Nathan. Or maybe it was just her new life, in which there was no place for Brian. "You hardly talk," she said one day at dinner, her fork hovering over the salad. Did something happen? He looked at her, his eyes as empty as the windows of their house. "Nothing," he answered, and his voice was colder than the air in the room. "Just busy." "Work?" She raised an eyebrow, but there was no real interest in her tone. "You're always busy." "Yes," he nodded, looking away. "Always." She didn't insist. She never insisted. She simply stood up, removed the plate, and went upstairs, leaving him alone. Brian sat, listening to her footsteps fade away and the house to fall into cold silence. He knew that she would leave in the evening, back to her friend. He knew that Nathan would be waiting for her somewhere there, in the shadows like a predator, and he knew he wouldn't stop her. Instead, he went to his office and opened the smart home app. The cameras showed empty rooms, but he didn't look at them. He knew what he would see if he checked the records. Her leaving, his coming, their shadows in the bedroom. He no longer looked for evidence. They were everywhere, in her distant gaze, in her lies, in the cold that filled their house. At night, he was at the station again. The mirror house had already taken shape. Walls, roof, windows, everything was almost ready. He stood inside, in the upside-down living room, where everything was the same, but wrong. There was no laughter, there was no betrayal, but there was no love either. Only cold, the same as in their real home. Brian touched the glass wall, his fingers leaving a mark on the cold surface. He built this house to maintain control, but now he realized that control was an illusion. Sophia did not see his pain, did not see him at home, did not see him. And maybe she never saw. He returned home in the morning, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow she will leave again, and he will be silent again. But the house of mirrors will grow like his secret, like his wound. And when he's ready, Brian will decide what to do next. For now, he just waited in the cold, in silence, in a house that had ceased to be a home. The night enveloped the Lawson property like black velvet, hiding everything that should not be seen. Brian Lawson stood in the unfinished living room of the Mirror House number 2, his secret project, which grew in the shade of the trees, invisible to Sophia. Moonlight reflected from the glass walls, but these glasses were not ordinary. Brian put more into them than architecture. They were his new level of control, his way of rewriting the reality he had lost. The House of Mirrors was almost ready. Every wall, every beam, every corner was a copy of their first house, but upside down. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, everything was identical, but with the opposite orientation, like a reflection in a distorted mirror. Brian had designed it with obsessive precision, But now he was adding the finishing touch: smart glass. These panels, controlled through his system, could change transparency at the touch of a button. Impenetrable on the outside, they could become completely transparent on the inside, or vice versa. It wasn't just technology. This was his power over the truth. Brian sat on a folding chair in the center of the unfinished living room, his laptop resting on top of a toolbox. The screen glowed, casting shadows on his face, haggard from insomnia. His fingers flew over the keyboard, adding code to control the glass. He had already tested the system on one panel. During the day, it looked like an ordinary mirror, reflecting the forest and sky, but at night, at his command, it became transparent, revealing a view of the site. He could see everything while remaining invisible. It was perfect. "You will be my eyes," he muttered, turning to the glass. His voice was hoarse, almost alien. He didn't know who he was talking to: the house, himself, or maybe Sophia, who never noticed his pain. She continued to live her life, leaving to visit her friends, returning with the smell of someone else's perfume, not seeing how their home, their marriage, was turning into an icy desert. Programming the windows took weeks. Brian worked in secret, using a server disconnected from the main smart home system. He didn't want anyone, especially Nathan, who he suspected was already tampering with his cameras, gaining access. The code was complex: algorithms to control transparency, synchronization with motion sensors, protection from external interference. Brian built in two-factor authentication that only he knew. This was his project, his truth, his revenge. He finished the code at 3 o'clock in the morning. Standing up, he walked over to one of the panels and connected it to a temporary power source. The laptop screen flickered and Brian pressed a button on the app. The glass, which had previously reflected his own face, tired, with dark circles under his eyes, became transparent. Behind him, a view of the site opened up: dark trees, stars, distant lights of their first house. Brian looked at him, feeling something tighten in his chest. This was his home, but now it seemed alien, like a photograph from a past life. He switched the glass back to mirror mode, and his reflection returned, but now it looked different. Not just tired, but broken. He turned away, his gaze falling on the drawings lying on the floor. Two houses, identical but opposite. One is the house of betrayal, where Sophia and Nathan destroyed everything he built. The other is his mirror, his chance to take control. But control over what? He didn't know. He just kept building. Sophia didn't notice anything. She returned home in the morning. Her steps were light, as if she was afraid to break the silence. Brian barely spoke to her. Their dialogues, if they could be called that, boiled down to short phrases. "Have you eaten?" "Yes." "I'll stay with Lisa." "Fine." He looked at her, but did not see his wife. He saw the woman who kissed Nathan on their terrace, who made love to him on their bed, who lied to him every day. And yet he remained silent. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because words were useless. The house, their first home, became icy. The thermostats worked properly, but the cold came not from the walls, but from themselves. Brian slept on the couch, avoiding the bedroom where he could still see the shadows of that recording. Sophia didn't ask why he didn't lie next to her. She left more and more often. Her excuses became more and more casual. At Lisa's, at a friend's, meeting with colleagues. Brian nodded, his face unreadable, but inside he was burning. He knew she was dating Nathan. He saw their cars appearing and disappearing in unison. He saw their shadows on the recordings. And now he could see more. The house of mirrors was almost completed. Workers were finishing the interior decoration and installing smart glass around the entire perimeter. Brian came every night to check on progress. He stood in an upside-down bedroom where everything was the same as in their house, but in reverse. The bed he ordered was a copy of the one in their bedroom. The sheets, curtains, even the lamp on the bedside table, everything was the same as the original. But she wasn't here. Nathan was missing. This was his world, pure, not subject to betrayal. He tested the glass in the bedroom. He pressed a button, and the wall became transparent, revealing a view of the forest. Another click, and it's mirrored again, hiding everything. Brian imagined how Sophia would walk in here, how her face would change when she saw this house. He didn't know if he wanted this. He didn't know what he wanted. But the glass gave him the power to see while remaining invisible, the power to decide what to show and what to hide. One night, returning to the first house, he found Sophia in the living room. She sat on the couch, her phone glowing in the dark. She didn't hear him come in, and Brian stood in the doorway, watching. Her fingers typed quickly, her lips curling into a faint smile. He knew who she was writing to. He knew that she would leave in an hour, saying that she would stay at Lisa's. She knew that Nathan would be waiting for her somewhere there in the shadows. "You're late," she said, finally noticing him. Her voice was level, but she quickly turned off the phone. "Work," Brian answered, his tone as empty as the rooms around him. He didn't ask what she was doing, didn't mention her smile, her lies. He simply walked past, heading to the office. "Brian," her voice stopped him on the stairs. He turned around, and for a second he thought she wanted to say something real. But she just shook her head. "Good night." "Calm down," he answered and left. In his office, he opened the laptop and launched the Mirror House system. The glass worked flawlessly, switching between transparency and mirror at his command. He looked at the upside-down living room, at the reflection of his world, and felt the cold growing inside him. This was his level of access to the truth, to the pain, to what was left of his life. Sophia left an hour later, her car disappearing into the night. Brian didn't check the cameras. He knew what he would see. Instead, he went to the site, to the House of Mirrors, where the glass was waiting for his order. He pressed a button, and the wall became transparent, revealing the darkness of the forest. But in this darkness, he saw only his reflection, a man who built 2 houses but lost everything. 6 months flew by like shadows, leaving the Lawson house cold and alien. The April wind carried the scent of flowering trees, but inside the glass walls it was winter. Brian and Sophia lived like strangers. Their conversations were as rare as raindrops in the desert, and their eyes never met. The love that once bound them dissolved into betrayal, lies, and silence that ate away at everything they had built. The House of Mirrors house number 2 was completed. Brian poured into him his pain, his obsession, his last attempt at control. Every wall, every window, every smart glass that could become transparent at his command was an exact reflection of their first home, but upside down, like a distorting mirror of their marriage. He hid this project from Sophia until the time was right. The anniversary of them moving into their first dream home, a year since they had laughed with guests and made plans, was his chance. Not for reconciliation, but for observation. On Friday morning, Brian found Sophia in the kitchen. She stood by the window, holding a mug of tea, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon. He cleared his throat, and she turned around, her face calm but blank. "Sophie," he began, his voice firm, although everything inside was trembling. "I want to tell you something." She raised an eyebrow, her fingers gripping the mug a little tighter. "What?" "I've been preparing a surprise all this time." He paused, watching her reaction. Her eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. "Second home. The one we plan for the future. He's ready." Sophia blinked, her lips parting. "House?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did you build it? One?" "Yes," Brian nodded, without looking away. "I wanted it to be special. For us." She hesitated, her fingers fiddling with the handle of the mug. "This is unexpected," she said finally. "You didn't say anything. When can I see him?" "Soon," he smiled, but the smile was cold, like the glass of their house. "I need to go on a business trip for a couple of days. Client in Boston. I'll be back on Sunday, and we'll celebrate. Anniversary, new house, it will be beautiful." Sophia nodded, her face softening, but something flashed in her eyes, curiosity, suspicion. "Sounds great," she said. "I'm waiting." "Great," Brian stood up, his movements as polished as an actor's. "I'm leaving in the evening. Don't be bored." She didn't answer, just looked at him a little longer than usual. Brian walked out, feeling his heart pounding. The business trip was a lie. He didn't go to Boston. He left to keep an eye on it. The House of Mirrors was ready, Its cameras and smart glasses were waiting. He knew that Sophia would not be left alone. He knew she would call Nathan, and he wanted to see what she would do with his surprise. Brian left at 6 p.m., his SUV slowly rolling out of the driveway. He stopped at a motel 20 miles from home, rented a room under an assumed name, and opened up his laptop. His system linking both houses was active. Cameras from the first house showed Sophia walking around the kitchen holding a bottle of wine. She looked nervous, her movements were fast, almost nervous. Brian switched to the house of mirrors, where the smart glass was in mirror mode, hiding empty rooms. He waited. At 8:03 p.m., his phone vibrated. Notification from the system. Motion sensor in the mirror house. Brian frowned, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The house of mirrors was locked, only he had access. He opened the app and switched to the cameras of house No. 2. The living room was lit with soft light, and Sophia stood there. She held a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Her dress dark red, tight emphasized her figure. She looked around, her face a mixture of surprise and delight. Brian felt the blood drain from his face. How did she get there? He didn't give her the key, didn't tell her where the house was. But then he saw her take out her phone and dial a number. A minute later, the front door opened and Nathan Keller entered. His dark jacket was casually unbuttoned, and he held a bouquet of flowers in his hands. He smiled at Sophia, and she laughed, rushing towards him. Their hug was short but intimate, as if they had done this 1,000 times. Brian switched to sound. "Are you sure this is normal?" Nathan's voice was low, with a slight hoarseness. "Did he really leave?" "Yes," Sophia smiled, pouring wine. "Business trip. He said he would be back on Sunday. And this," she gestured around the living room, "is his surprise. New home. I found the key in his office. I wanted to see." Nathan chuckled, his hand sliding around her waist. "Surprise, then? Not bad. But I'd say you're the best surprise." They laughed, their glasses clinking. Brian watched them walk around the living room as Sophia showed him the house, her voice shaking with excitement. "It's like our house, but on the contrary," she said, standing by the window. "It's strange, isn't it?" "Strange," Nathan agreed, but his gaze was focused on her, not on the house. "But it's beautiful. How are you?" Brian clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. She was in his house of mirrors, with Nathan, celebrating their anniversary in the place he had built as a reflection of their pain. It was more than a betrayal. It was desecrated. He pressed a button on the app, and the living room windows became transparent. Sophia and Nathan didn't notice they were too busy with each other, their shadows moving in a dance that Brian knew all too well. He switched to the bedroom camera. They hadn't gotten there yet, but he knew they would. A mirrored bedroom, with the same bed, the same sheets, was waiting for them. He could have stopped it, set the alarm, blocked the doors, broken in. But instead he watched them laugh, how Nathan kissed her neck, how Sophia pulled him towards the stairs. Brian closed his laptop. The screen went dark, but the images remained. Sophia, Nathan, his house, his second home, which was supposed to be clean, but became as dirty as the first. He lay down on the motel bed, his breathing heavy, as if the air had become lead. He won't go there. He won't scream. He won't fight. He just waited, as he had waited all these months, watching his world crumble. Brian opened the app that controls the House of Mirrors. The cameras showed Sophia and Nathan in the living room of house number 2. They laughed, their glasses of wine clinked, their hands intertwined. Sophia was in the same red dress. Her hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes sparkled, as if she had forgotten about him, about their marriage, about everything. Nathan leaned towards her, his lips touching her neck, and she did not move away. Brian watched, his face was stony, but everything inside was burning. He switched to the smart glass system. For 6 months, he programmed them to become transparent at his command, to hide or reveal the truth. But he added one more function, a secret even from himself until that night. Not only could glass become transparent, it could project images like a giant screen. He connected the house's cameras to a projection system, synchronizing them so that everything that happens inside is broadcast onto the facade. not just for him, for everyone. His finger hovered over the button. This was an irreversible step. He knew that he would destroy not only Sophia and Nathan, but also himself. Their marriage, their reputation, their lives in the area. But he could no longer remain silent. The explosive silence that had been growing inside him for months demanded a way out, and he gave her free rein. Brian pressed the button. In the house of mirrors, the glass blinked. In an instant, they ceased to be mirror-like, becoming completely transparent. The living room where Sophia and Nathan were hugging came into view. But that was just the beginning. The projection system turned on, and the front of the house turned into a giant screen. The images from the cameras Sophia, Nathan, their kisses, their laughter, their intimacy flashed on the glass walls, bright as a wave of light flooding the night. Brian switched to the external cameras installed on the site. The street, usually quiet and sleepy, came to life. The neighbors' windows lit up one after another. People came out onto the porch. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and horror. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, dropped her cup, its fragments scattered across the lawn. The young guy with the dog froze. His phone was already filming what was happening. Someone shouted, someone gasped. The shock spread like ripples on the water. Inside the house of mirrors, Sophia and Nathan did not notice anything. They were too absorbed in each other. Their world shrank to touches and whispers. But then Sophia froze. Her gaze slid to the window, and she saw light, not moonlight, not street light, but something bright, pulsating. She pulled away from Nathan, her face turning pale. She walked up to the glass, her hand shaking. "What is this?" Her voice, picked up by the camera microphones, was full of panic. She looked at the facade, where their own images enlarged, ruthlessly clear, moved in real time. She saw herself, Nathan, their hugs, their kisses, everything that should have remained a secret. Nathan jumped, his eyes widening. What the hell? He rushed to the window. His fist hit the glass, but it did not flinch. Are these cameras? Who did it? Sophia turned to him, her face contorted in horror. "Brian," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is him." Outside, the street was buzzing. Neighbors gathered, their voices merging into a chaotic chorus. Some called the police, some took videos, some just stood there, unable to look away. Mr. Thompson, a neighbor 2 doors down, shouted something about shame. Children, awakened by the noise, looked out of the windows. Their parents tried to close the curtains, but it was too late. The truth burst out like a wave of light, and it could not be stopped. Brian watched from the motel, his laptop showing it all. Sophia's panic, Nathan's rage, the neighbor's shock. He didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel any relief. He felt empty. His finger was still on the button, but he didn't press it again. He did what he wanted. He showed the world their lies, their betrayal, their dirt. But this did not return Sophia to him. Didn't give him his house back. It didn't give him back himself. Sophia in the house of mirrors fell to her knees, her hands covering her face. Nathan rushed around the room, trying to find a light switch, a door, anything to stop it. But Brian's system was flawless. The cameras kept filming, the glass kept projecting, and the street kept watching. Sophia was sobbing, her shoulders were shaking, but Brian didn't hear her. He turned off the sound. He didn't need her tears. They were as false as her promises. He closed the laptop, and the screen went dark. The motel was quiet, with only the distant hum of traffic breaking the silence. Brian lay down on the bed, his eyes staring at the ceiling. He knew that tomorrow the police would come to him with questions. He knew that Sophia would probably try to explain, justify, blame him. Knew that their life in this area was over. But it didn't matter. He built 2 houses, one for love, the other for truth. The first became a prison of betrayal. The second became the scene of his revenge. And now, when the light wave of truth flooded the street, he was left with nothing. No home, no wife, no future. Only emptiness, cold and endless, like the glass he programmed. The morning after the light wave came with a heavy, gray sky, as if Connecticut was mourning ruined lives. The Lawson house, once a shining symbol of their dreams, stood empty, its glass walls reflecting only clouds and loneliness. The house of mirrors, house number 2, rose across the road, its smart glass once again in mirror mode, hiding the traces of the night's shame. But the truth, which burst out like a flash, has already changed everything. The street, yesterday quiet and decent, was now buzzing with whispers, condemnation, and curiosity. Brian returned home at dawn. His SUV pulled into the driveway, but he didn't get out immediately. He sat clutching the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the house he had built for Sophia. Now it was just a skeleton, empty like his soul. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't think about anything other than what he did. The light wave, his revenge, his truth, burned everything he had. He felt no relief, no sense of victory. Only fatigue, so deep that it seemed eternal. When he entered the house, silence greeted him like an old enemy. Sophia was here, her car was parked at the garage, but she did not come forward. He didn't call her. He walked into the living room, where the smell of the wine she drank with Nathan still lingered. Two glasses on the table, one with the imprint of her lipstick, the other empty, looked at him like silent witnesses. Brian touched them with his fingers, but did not break them. He was too empty to be angry. Brian, her voice, weak and trembling, came from the doorway. He turned around slowly, every movement seemed to be in slow motion. Sophia stood leaning against the doorframe, her face was pale, her eyes were red from tears. She looked small, fragile, as if the night had squeezed the life out of her. "Why did you do this?" He looked at her, but did not see his wife. He saw the woman who laughed with Nathan, who kissed him in their bedroom, who celebrated in his house of mirrors, unaware that he was watching. "You know why," he answered, his voice as cold as the glass of their house. "You chose him. I showed everyone what you chose." Her lips trembled, but she did not look away. "You destroyed us," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not me, Brian. Us. Do you think it made you a better person? Do you think this fixed anything?" "I didn't want to correct," he said, and there was a truth in his words that he himself had just realized. "I wanted you to feel what I did, so you know what it's like to be crushed." Sophia shook her head, her tears falling to the floor. "You never spoke to me," she said, her voice filled with pain. "You watched, built your houses, your systems, your plans, but you never asked how I felt. Why did I do this?" He opened his mouth to protest, to say that her betrayal needed no explanation. But the words stuck. He remembered their last years, her detachment, her lies, his silence. He knew she was moving away, but he didn't ask. He built, observed, controlled. Maybe she was right, but that didn't matter anymore. "Go away, Sophia," he finally said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Go away and don't come back." She froze, her eyes widening as if she hadn't expected this. "This is my home too," she said, but her voice was weak, almost pleading. "Not yours," he snapped. "This is mine. I built it, and I don't want you here anymore." She looked at him, her face contorted in pain, but she did not argue. She turned and walked away, her steps as quiet as a whisper. An hour later, he heard her car driving away. He didn't look out the window. He knew she wouldn't come back. The street did not forgive. By noon, gossip had spread throughout the area like sparks from a fire. Lawsons, scandal, treason, the words were repeated in conversations behind fences, in cafes, and in local chats. Someone taped a note to their mailbox, "Shame." Someone threw a stone at the window of the house of mirrors, and the glass cracked like their life. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who always said hello to Brian, now looked away as he passed by. Young people filmed videos near the house of mirrors, posting them on social networks with hashtags that cut like a knife. Nathan Keller has disappeared. Mark, Brian's partner at the firm, said that Nathan had quit his company and left town. His wife found out, Mark said, his voice cautious, as if he was afraid to offend. She filed for divorce. People keep up, call, write. He just ran away. Brian said nothing. He didn't feel sorry for Nathan. He was part of his pain, but now he was nothing, a shadow dissolved under the light of truth. But Brian did not remain unscathed. His architecture firm began losing clients. 2 major projects were canceled, with clients citing reputational risks. Mark tried to soften the blow, but Brian saw his look a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. "It will pass, old man," Mark said, but his words sounded empty. Brian knew it wouldn't work. He became an outcast, a man who exposed his life, a man who destroyed everything for the sake of revenge. The police came the next day. Two officers, a man and a woman, asked questions about the projection, about the cameras, about how he got the footage. Brian answered calmly, without hiding anything. Yes, he installed cameras. Yes, he programmed the windows. Yes, he did it on purpose. The officers looked at each other, their faces unreadable. "This may be a violation of privacy laws, Mr. Lawson," the woman said. "We will contact you." He nodded without arguing. He knew there could be consequences, fines, maybe a trial. But he didn't care. He lost everything that mattered. The morning after the light wave brought not only gray skies, but also a storm that engulfed Connecticut. The Lawson house, once the symbol of their dreams, has become the epicenter of the scandal, and the House of Mirrors is its sinister twin. The street, where silence reigned just yesterday, was now buzzing with curious glances, whispers, and condemnation. The truth that broke out through Brian's smart glasses did not just destroy his marriage, it became public property, scattered throughout the area, the city, and then across the internet. Sophia left that same day. Brian didn't see her pack her things or hear the front door slam. He learned about this from Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor who, despite the condemnation, still spoke to him, albeit warily. "She went to Keller," said the old woman, her voice full of sympathy mixed with disapproval. "I saw her car at his house. With suitcases." Brian nodded, his face remaining motionless. He wasn't surprised. Sophia chose Nathan a long time ago, even before the night he exposed them to everyone. But knowledge did not ease the pain. It only made her sharper, like a shard of glass stuck in her heart. He filed for divorce the next day. His lawyer, an elderly man with tired eyes, didn't ask too many questions. "The scandal will complicate matters," he said, leafing through the documents. "Publicity works against both of you, but I will do everything to make it go quickly." Brian just nodded. He didn't need money, property, or revenge. He needed freedom from Sophia, from their past, from the house that had become a prison. The Lawson story leaked online faster than Brian could have imagined. Videos taken by neighbors the night the mirrored house's facade turned into a screen went viral on social media. The hashtags #HouseTrader and #MirrorOffTruth filled the platforms. Users discussed everything from smart glass technology to the moral failure of Sophia and Nathan. Some called Brian a genius, others a psychopath. But most simply savored the drama, like predators tearing apart their prey. Local newspapers picked up the story. The headline screamed, "The house that revealed the truth, the architect of revenge, how a smart home exposed treason, the Connecticut scandal, love, lies, and technology." Reporters besieged Brian's house, their cameras flashing like lightning. He did not open the door, did not answer calls. But they did not leave, filming his house, the House of Mirrors, even the neighbors who happily shared gossip. "It was like a movie," Mr. Thompson said in an interview with a local TV channel, his face glowing with excitement. "The glass lit up, and we saw everything. Well, you understand. I never thought the Lawsons were like this. Publicity has become a stranglehold." Brian stopped leaving the house to order food for delivery. His firm had lost another major client, and Mark, his partner, began hinting that perhaps Brian should take some time off. "People say, old man," he said, avoiding his gaze. "This is not only about Sophia, this is about you. About all of this." Brian didn't argue. He knew his reputation was ruined. The architect who built dream houses became a man who put his life on display. It became a traitor house, as it was dubbed online, and this nickname burned like a brand. Nathan Keller couldn't stand it. Public humiliation, condemnation from his neighbors, and the anger of his own wife, who learned about the affair from the same videos, broke him. A week after the light wave, he quit his finance company, sold his car, and left town. Nobody knew where some said about New York, some about Canada. Brian found out about this from Mark, who, despite the awkwardness, still called. His wife filed for divorce, Mark said, his voice quiet. People didn't lag behind. They called, wrote, even threatened. He just ran away. Brian said nothing. He felt neither pity nor gloating. Nathan was part of his pain, but now he was nothing. Just a shadow that disappeared, leaving Sophia alone. Sophia did not stay with Nathan for long. 2 weeks after he left, she also left. Brian learned from a lawyer that she had moved to live with her mother in Vermont. She won't contest the divorce, the lawyer said, shuffling through the papers. He wants everything to end quietly, as far as possible. Quiet. The word sounded like a mockery. Nothing in their history was quiet. The wave of light Brian launched was too bright, too loud to subside. A month has passed since the night Brian Lawson's wave of light shattered the silence of their Connecticut suburb. The Lawson house stood empty, its glass walls reflecting the autumn leaves falling on the lawn. The house of mirrors, his secret project, was boarded up, its smart glasses turned off, as if they, too, were tired of the truth. Sophia went to stay with her mother in Vermont, Nathan disappeared from town, and Brian was left alone, in the midst of gossip, judgment, and his own emptiness. His life was in pieces, but he was still an architect. And as it turns out, architects do not die, even when their worlds collapse. A new order arrived unexpectedly. Mark, his partner at the firm, called on a gray morning while Brian was drinking coffee, looking at the empty horizon. "There's a project," Mark said, his voice cautious but with a hint of enthusiasm. "City Hall building. They want something special, and they want you." Brian frowned, his fingers tightening around his mug. "Me?" he asked, his voice hoarse from weeks of silence. "After everything?" "Yes," Mark coughed, clearly awkward. "They know about the scandal. But the mayor said you understand glass. They want transparency, honesty, something to show that the city is open." Brian almost laughed, but it caught in his throat. Transparency, honesty, the words that he once associated with love, with Sophia, with their home, now sounded like mockery. But he didn't refuse, not because I wanted to work, but because I didn't know what else to do. Building was the only thing that kept him from falling into the abyss. The City Hall building was supposed to become a new symbol of the city glass, airy, open. Brian met with the mayor and his team in their office, which overlooked the old square. The mayor, an elderly man with gray temples, spoke of a new era of trust, of how the city should be transparent as glass. Brian listened, his face unreadable, but inside he felt the words cutting like splinters. "We heard about your project," the mayor said, choosing his words. "The house that showed the truth. It was unusual, but it proves that you know how to work with glass, how to make him talk." Brian looked at him, his eyes were cold, but there was a spark in them. "We live in glass houses," he said quietly, his voice even but heavy. "Only some people know about this. Others pretend the walls are impenetrable." The mayor nodded as if he understood, although Brian knew he didn't. Nobody understood. But the order was signed, and Brian returned to the drawings. For the first time in months, he felt that his hands weren't shaking when he held a pencil. The City Hall project was both his salvation and his punishment. He worked nights in an office that now seemed too big without Mark and the others who had avoided him since the scandal. The glass he chose for the building was not just transparent, it was smart, like in a house of mirrors, but without projections, without revenge. They could change the transparency, letting in light or creating privacy, but their main purpose was symbolic, to show that there was nothing to hide. Brian knew it was a lie. Everyone is hiding something. But he built it because it was all he had left. He designed City Hall as the antithesis of his home. If the Lawson house was closed, intimate, then the City Hall was open, public. If the House of Mirrors was his revenge, then this building was supposed to become. What? Redemption? He didn't know. He simply drew, calculated, programmed. Glass, steel, light, all this was his language, and he spoke it like never before. The publicity of the scandal did not subside. Newspapers continued to write about the traitor house, as the House of Mirrors was dubbed. The house that revealed the truth, read the headline in the Connecticut Post, and the article described how Brian used technology to expose cheating. Social networks were buzzing. Some called him a hero, others called him a manipulator. Someone even started a petition to tear down the House of Mirrors, calling it a monument to shame. Brian didn't read the comments or watch the news, but he knew that his name was now associated not with architecture, but with drama. Sophia did not return. The lawyer said she signed the divorce papers without contesting anything. She lived with her mother in Vermont, away from gossip, away from cameras, away from him. Nathan was said to have gone to Canada, leaving his wife, his career, his life. Brian didn't look for them. They were part of his past, like the house he built, like the love he lost. Construction of the city hall began 3 months after the order. Brian was on site every day, watching the glass panels rise, watching the steel glisten in the sun. The workers whispered about him, calling him that same architect, but he did not pay attention. He talked to engineers, checked drawings, and tested glass. This was his world, and in it he felt alive. One day, standing on the unfinished square, he noticed Mark, who came to check the progress. "It looks amazing," Mark said, his voice sincere. "You did it, old man." Despite everything, Brian looked at him. His eyes were tired, but there was a hint of a smile in them. "Glass doesn't lie," he said, "but it doesn't forgive either." Mark nodded, not knowing what to answer. He walked away, leaving Brian alone among the steel beams and glass walls. City Hall was completed 6 months later. The opening was modest. The mayor gave a speech about transparency, about a new beginning, about trust. Brian stood to the side, his jacket wrinkled, his face drawn. He didn't applaud, didn't smile. He simply watched the light pass through the glass, creating rainbow reflections on the floor. After the ceremony, he entered the building alone. The hum of voices died down, and he found himself in the central hall, surrounded by glass walls. They were transparent, but reflected his figure, his face, his shadows. There were many reflections, dozens, hundreds. They multiplied, intertwined, creating the illusion of a crowd. But there was only one real one. Brian Lawson, the architect who built a dream home and destroyed it. A man who searched for the truth and found only pain. He touched the glass, his fingers leaving a faint mark. "We live in glass houses," he whispered, his voice dissolving into silence. "And I always knew about it." He stood there, alone, among the reflections that looked at him but could not answer. Behind the glass there was a city, there were people, there was life. But for Brian, all this was far away. He was the architect of light, but the light he created illuminated only his loneliness. The final frame is frozen. A man in a glass building, surrounded by reflections, but only one real person. The glass was honest. It showed everything. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.